Yeah, thanks for taking the time to meet with us. If you guys could just introduce yourself and kind of tell us a little bit about your job and what got you into that, would be awesome.
Yeah, I can start. My name is Becca Stock, and I am a consulting engineer. We've been working with the City of Greeley through the Xcel Energy Partners in Energy program, which is looking at energy efficiency and renewable energy in Greeley. And I got into this job kind of in a roundabout sort of way. I picked up an internship doing industrial energy audits as a summer job and really just fell in love with the puzzle solving that's involved in engineering, kind of looking at where our gaps are and what opportunities we have to kind of fill in those gaps. So I really like the problem solving part of this, and that's really kind of what got me hooked. And now I do not only energy efficiency, but all sorts of sustainability planning, looking at reducing our carbon, reducing our energy use, electrifying our transportation and buildings.
And my name's Terry Hatfield. I also work with Becca, also a consulting engineer, helping Caleb and the city of Greeley try to meet their goals in terms of energy efficiency and renewable energy. I got into engineering and energy efficiency, sustainability really from an early age when I first saw the documentary An Inconvenient Truth that really put the problem of climate change into perspective for me and really drove the passion towards getting into this field. So I studied engineering at a university on the East Coast and moved to Colorado to join a consulting engineering firm here to really put some plans into action.
Yeah, my name's Caleb Jackson. I'm a planner at the city of Greeley. And back in high school, actually, I grew up in Greeley and I shadowed a planner with the city of Greeley and was kind of excited about all of the growth that's occurring here, the things that we continue to build here, and wanted to be a part of that and make Greeley a better place to live, work, learn, and play. And so part of that is our planning in the Energy Action Plan, and we're going to talk about some of that today.
Awesome. Well, we were really excited to have you guys on this kind of broad mix of experience and expertise. So we were wondering if you could just tell us a little bit about your guys' approach to reducing carbon footprint, kind of on all the different scales.
The general approach to reducing your carbon footprint is really to first start by reducing the amount of energy you use. And once you've kind of tried to optimize the energy you use, then you can try to source that energy from a low carbon source. So examples of that could be renewable energy in wind and solar. And depending on how far you want to go, if you want to go completely carbon neutral, carbon free, reduce your carbon footprint all the way to zero, it's a good idea to just make a plan of how to put that into action. So for example, from the utility scale, Xcel Energy is the regional energy supplier for the city of Greeley. They supply electricity and natural gas. And they've laid out goals to achieve both energy efficiency savings targets, as well as a plan to shift the electricity generation to 100% carbon-free sources by 2050. So that's kind of two ways that they're taking the approach to help customers like you and me to drastically reduce our local emissions.
Yeah, so one of the things that the city of Greeley has recently done is adopted this Energy Action Plan. And what that does is it lays out some strategies of how to reduce energy, adopt renewable energy, and educate and encourage residents like you and businesses to find ways to do the same.
Right. So I'm going to just show a little bit about how this might work in your home as an example. So Terry, if you want to go ahead and share the screen, there's a graph here that shows kind of how energy is typically used in someone's home. So the first thing we're going to look at is kind of what those big energy users are, because Terry mentioned we want to reduce our energy use first. So that means that we need to know what energy users are the biggest. So you can see here the big dark green portion of this graph is our heating and cooling. So that's going to be your furnace or your air conditioner, how you keep your house warm or cool. And so there's some strategies we can look at there. Simple ones like turning it down when you don't need it, when you're not at home, or even replacing it with more efficient equipment. So there's a couple of strategies there, and we'll go into more at this further. But we might start tackling that one first and kind of doing those easy win, low cost opportunities as our very first step. And then as we get those taken care of, then we might look deeper into some of these other opportunities in your appliances or your lighting or things like that.
All right. Super, super cool. So you guys talked a little bit, you kind of hinted at that kind of the energy crisis isn't necessarily just about using different energy, but about using our energy better. So you talk a little bit more about some of the energy efficiency opportunities that we can be doing as citizens and as cities. And
absolutely, yeah. So we always talk about kind of in this sustainability world, the cleanest energy is the energy you never use, because we never have to build a plant to create that energy. We don't have to build the solar panels or the wind turbines to create it. So we look at energy efficiency as our first option. It also tends to be the lowest cost option. So we talked a little bit before about identifying those big energy users. So that would be the first step in any energy efficiency project, whether it's at home or it's at a larger scale. Once you've identified those big energy users, you want to do kind of three things. One is you can turn things off or turn them down when you don't need them. So at home, that might be turn off your lights when you leave the room or turn down the thermostat when you guys aren't at home. In a business, you might have other opportunities on different equipment. Then you look at your equipment and you could install more efficient equipment. So if your refrigerator is 20 years old, there might be an opportunity to replace that with a refrigerator that uses less energy, something that's Energy Star certified or something like that. Or you might replace your old incandescent light bulbs with new LED light bulbs. So that way when they are on, they're using less energy. And the last piece is a little bit different, and that's shifting when we use our energy to different times. So you have to think about if everyone uses energy at the same time, then the power plant has to run a lot more than if we can spread that out over a longer period of time. So we want to shift loads to when people aren't using them all the time. So for example, if you can, run your washing machine overnight when not a lot of other energy is being used, that can help reduce the load on the grid as well. And I'll pass it over to Caleb to give you some examples of what the city is up to.
Yeah, so what Becca was talking about is what we call strategic energy management. And the city has been working on a plan looking at our facilities of what is used during a different time of the day, and maybe we can turn things off at a different time of the day. Also looking at ways we can just use less energy. And one example of what we've actually done recently is at the Ice House, which is the skating rink downtown. We've upgraded our lighting in there to be much more efficient and use less energy.
And from a utility perspective, they take a different approach to incentivize others to use less energy. So using Xcel Energy just as an example, they have a range of energy efficiency programs to help residences and businesses make it cost competitive to choose efficient technologies over more traditional approaches when you make upgrades either to your lighting or to your heating equipment. And as communities grow and change, the utility might need to build more power and heating generation capacity. So having programs in place to encourage energy efficiency can help stretch existing generation resources for electricity so that more people can use the same resources. It's much cheaper, cost effective to offer energy efficiency programs and reduce the load on the electrical grid than it is to build a new power plant, which is much more expensive. And so in the long run, keeping all of the resources to a minimum can help reduce energy use and in turn the carbon footprint.
But past that efficiency aspect, there's also this idea of using alternate energy resources and kind of specifically renewable ones. Can you guys talk a little bit about how we get electricity from these other types of resources?
Sure, yeah, I can start. And let me share my screen once more to show a plan from the electricity perspective that Xcel Energy and the utility scale is taking. As I mentioned earlier, they have a goal by 2050 to reduce the emissions associated with electricity to be 100% carbon free. How to do this really is right now using wind and solar as the two main drivers to shift generation from traditional sources to renewable energy. Natural gas is a little bit more difficult because using gas for heating, in some cases it's harder to and more expensive to shift that to be renewable. One approach is to try to convert the natural gas or fossil fuel based heating equipment to electric based, so that once it is using electricity instead of natural gas or some other fossil fuel, over time that the emissions associated with running that type of equipment would go down as you're shifting electricity generation, the source of that energy, to renewable energy sources. Otherwise, there's ways to capture emissions. This is sometimes called carbon sequestration. Trees are a great example of that, but there's other technologies like methane capture and anaerobic digesters that can take the emissions in the atmosphere and convert it to something else like methane.
Yeah, if you want to switch to the next slide here, the city of Greeley, we've been transitioning some of our facilities to be partly run by renewable energy. We have that at 4 different locations. 2 of the locations are at our water treatment sites, and those are above Fort Collins and over by Loveland, where we take the water in from our sources and make it clean to drink. And so we have a solar facility there. We also have one on the other end of the wastewater system at the wastewater treatment plant. So whenever you flush the toilet or water goes down the drain, we need to use a lot of energy and get that water clean before we put it back in the river. And so we also have an installation of solar panels there. One that's in town that a lot of you probably know is located off of 10th Street here, and 71st Avenue is on the left-hand side, 10th Street is on the top. And the big building there is King Soopers, and there's some solar panels back to the right of there. So if you drive behind King Soopers, you'd be able to see these solar panels. And they're providing 50% of the electricity that the city needs to run the family funplex across the sheep draw there.
So similar to what the city has been able to do in using solar to power some of their facilities, you can do the same thing at home. So you can either choose to install solar panels on your own home. This is a really good option if you have really nice sunny roof. And there's a lot of different companies that are doing that, and you're probably seeing a lot of those starting to pop up in your neighborhoods. And in this way, the electricity from your solar panels just goes directly into your home, and you use that in your home. And then if you don't have enough electricity from your solar panels, then you use the electricity provided by the utility. The other option is if you have a really shady home, or maybe you rent your home or something like that, where it's not really possible for you to install solar panels on your home. There are opportunities called solar gardens where you can purchase electricity that's generated at a ground mounted system similar to the one Caleb just showed you, where you basically subscribe to purchase the solar from there. So you own part of a solar panel, even though it's not on your home. So that's a good option as well. And most utilities also have an option for you to purchase renewable energy through your electric bill, if that's something you're interested in as well.
So we've talked a lot about renewables, but we also know that we can't just get rid of fossil fuels entirely. We have this kind of big reliance on them. So how can we better use them? What can we do with our fossil fuels as we move forward?
One option is to try and electrify those sources. So you'll hear a term called beneficial electrification. And that's where you take something like your natural gas heater at home and install an electric one instead. This means that you can run it off of solar or wind, and it can be renewable. It does also mean that you put a lot of extra loads on the electric grid. So there's a lot of modernization and expansion of the electric grid that will be required if we go down that path. You'll see the same thing in vehicles. All the electric vehicles are the same idea. Instead of burning gas in your vehicle, you're going to use batteries and power from the electric utility to power your vehicle. Again, you can run that off renewable energy. That also has the added benefit in both cases that you don't burn anything locally. So all of the smog that you see when you're driving down to Denver, that would be eliminated in that case. There's some other options out there. And Terry kind of alluded to this a little bit earlier. There are some ways to create basically renewable natural gas. You can capture the methane that landfills produce and use that to generate electricity or use that to burn directly. There's also opportunities to take like waste from dairy farms and use that to create methane, which can be turned into natural gas. There was actually a big facility that was planned for south of Greeley, and as last I knew, it had been paused permanently, I think is the state of that, which is a little bit unfortunate, but there is some problems there with people not wanting to live next to a big methane generating plant. There's also some people experimenting with using wood waste pellets to burn instead. So, we've had a lot of problems with beetle kill in the mountains, and using some of that wood instead of natural gas to burn is an opportunity. And there's a lot of researchers also that are looking at using algae to create biofuels, using algae to sequester carbon from the air and then using that to create diesel and things like that. So these are all kind of emerging technologies. I wouldn't say there's any one that's kind of coming out ahead, but I do think that's going to be important moving forward to fully decarbonize our economy.
I guess just kind of the last question we have for you guys is like, what does the future hold? Like, where do you guys see carbon reduction going in the future, and what are the things we can be kind of looking out for?
Yeah, so I do that some in my job in city planning, of planning how we're going to build in the future. And we want to make sure that it's easy to get around without using a car. And so part of that is making sure that you're able to live close to a location where you can get groceries, and close to where you can go to the pharmacy, and close to where you work in the future when you get a job. And also have other opportunities for you to travel. Like right now, we have the Ride Free with ID on the city bus, that you can get around the city on a bus and not have to drive. We're also, putting in bicycle infrastructure to make it easier to cycle around the city. And another thing that we've unveiled this last year, we brought back the Share the Shade program, where you can get a tree installed by the city in your front yard for $50. And trees are a tremendous way to reduce your carbon footprint. They can provide natural cooling and reduce the need to use your air conditioner, which is a high energy user in your home. And then they can also really sink carbon out of the air and put it back into the ground and into the tree where it belongs. So that's a really effective strategy that we're doing at the city.
Another kind of emerging technology that's starting to take hold for electric vehicles is the role of batteries in the future. And from the utility scale, that's where batteries can store energy that you're generating, so that you have more flexibility to kind of use it when you need it. And as more renewable energy is brought on the grid, that's based on solar and wind, we want to be able to have a reliable electricity source. So when the sun stops shining and the wind stops blowing, we can still use energy. And batteries can play a large part in that, to add additional resilience to the electric grid. So utilities like batteries because essentially you can use that energy that's stored in the battery anytime you want. So you can shift it away, shift your energy use away from when the majority of people throughout the course of a day are using it, in the middle of the day, to shift it over to, plugging into the grid when you really need to need to source your energy from the grid instead of a battery that's drained dry.
I'm sort of going to break the mold because I have two things that I want to share that I'm excited about. One of them, as Terry kind of alluded to, right now, our renewable energy options are really tied to kind of when the wind blows and the sun shines. And so we don't really have what the utilities would call a dispatchable resource, which means you push the button, it turns on, it gives you power. So one thing that is a emerging technology that I think is very exciting is some advancements in nuclear power. So right now our nuclear power plants use radioactive materials to create energy. But there are some new power plants that use nuclear fusion that basically take oxygen and hydrogen and smush them together, take the energy from that reaction and create electricity. And then the byproduct is water. So it's 100% clean. It's really nice because if something happens in the reactor, it just turns itself off. It doesn't have these big nuclear disasters like you probably have heard about. So there's some plants in Germany and South Korea that are starting to figure out how to do this. The problem is you have to keep it really hot. It's, sun temperatures hot. So they hold that reaction with gigantic magnets, which is very cool. So that's something that I'm watching and I think could be one of the answers to how we completely remove carbon from our utility grid. The other thing that I think is probably coming is carbon sequestration at a large scale. So Caleb mentioned how trees and plants naturally sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and that's going to be really important. But I think also just utility scale carbon sequestration that can take atmospheric carbon and either create fuels from it or just bury it in the ground where it belongs is going to be really important for us to meet our carbon reduction goals that we need to curb global warming.
Awesome. Sounds like there's some really cool stuff coming in the future and some really great opportunities. Well, thank you guys so much for sharing all that with us. I think it's really cool to see how much is happening in our city and that it's not just some obscure thing happening hundreds of miles and thousands of miles away. There's stuff, you could live by the funplex. It could be happening literally in your backyard or in your front yard with a new tree. There's so many options. Thank you guys so much for sharing with us.
Absolutely. It's really exciting. And part of what I love about this job is that, there's some big actions that need to happen, through policies or through utilities, but there's also some really great things that you can do in the meantime. So I love just kind of everyone needs to pitch in and make this happen. So it makes a big community effort.
Yeah, thank you all for being a part of Greeley's energy future.
Really a pleasure to talk to you. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.